The decision by Arkansas and Indiana to push for a ban on soda and candy from the list of eligible purchases under the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, is generating considerable debate. At its core, this initiative represents a significant shift in how states are beginning to approach public health, nutrition, and government support programs. While some critics warn that it may be overly paternalistic or difficult to implement, it also reflects a broader, potentially positive step toward prioritizing nutrition and long-term wellness in vulnerable populations. The central argument in favor of the ban is built around improving health outcomes among low-income families who are at higher risk for chronic diseases linked to diet, such as obesity, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. With nearly 42 million Americans relying on SNAP, this program has massive influence over the food purchasing habits of a large swath of the population. Supporters of the policy, including Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, argue that continuing to subsidize the purchase of sugar-laden beverages and processed candies ultimately does more harm than good, both for individual health and the national healthcare system. By preventing these purchases with federal funds, states hope to steer consumers toward more nutritious choices, which could reduce healthcare costs in the long run and increase overall quality of life. The emphasis on nutrition over convenience reflects a growing national concern that America's food system has become too heavily skewed toward processed, cheap, and high-calorie foods. Those who support the ban see it not as an attack on freedom of choice, but as a way to break a cycle of dietary habits that disproportionately harm the economically disadvantaged. Rather than continuing to allow the government to fund purchases that are known contributors to poor health, this policy sets a firmer line on what is appropriate for taxpayer-supported nutrition programs to support. The inclusion of previously excluded items like hot rotisserie chicken in Arkansas's proposal also signals a willingness to adapt the program in ways that provide more immediate, healthier meal options, not fewer. Still, the initiative isn't without its complications and genuine risks. Implementing a ban on certain products under SNAP poses a number of practical challenges. The USDA has previously cited the difficulty of defining what constitutes an unhealthy food and has noted that restricting specific items might not significantly influence broader eating habits. Enforcement would likely require complex reprogramming of payment systems, training for retailers, and careful guidance to avoid misunderstandings. Additionally, the USDA and anti-hunger groups have voiced concern that such restrictions could increase stigma, make SNAP more difficult to use, and potentially drive participants toward cheaper but equally unhealthy options not covered by the ban. There's also the matter of personal autonomy. Critics argue that this measure implies that low-income individuals are uniquely incapable of making informed decisions about their own diets, which is not only patronizing but also unsupported by evidence. Studies show that SNAP participants are no more likely than other Americans in similar income brackets to purchase unhealthy foods. That fact complicates the narrative that these individuals are uniquely responsible for poor dietary trends and raises questions about whether this policy truly addresses the problem at its root. Another concern is the backlash from trade groups and industries that would be affected. Representatives from the American Beverage Association and the National Confectioners Association argue that the policy unfairly targets a specific demographic and fails to acknowledge that candy and soda are widely consumed by Americans across all income levels. They suggest that the effort diverts attention from more meaningful strategies, such as job creation, food education, and economic empowerment. But in spite of these challenges, the positive intent behind the initiative should not be entirely dismissed. There is a real and urgent need to address the intersection between poverty and health, and this proposal is a bold attempt to do so. At a time when more Americans are being diagnosed with chronic conditions linked to diet and healthcare costs continue to rise, governments can no longer afford to ignore the role food policy plays in public health. If executed carefully and coupled with robust educational campaigns, better access to fresh foods, and greater investment in community support, this policy could be a stepping stone toward rethinking how we nourish our most vulnerable citizens. Ultimately, the key to the success of these proposals will lie in the details. If Arkansas and Indiana pursue this path in isolation, without federal support or attention to broader reforms, they may risk making SNAP more difficult to access and less effective. However, if these efforts are part of a larger strategy to invest in nutrition education, expand healthy food access in food deserts, and increase dignity and autonomy within public assistance programs, they could mark the beginning of a healthier, more proactive approach to food security in America.